right, good afternoon, everybody. Just want to make sure you guys have your notes out for 8-1, and we're going to start this lesson with quadratics and solving what quadratic equations are. If you see on my screen, I have the objective here, distinguish between perfect squares and non-perfect squares. We kind of already talked about that when we did the previous unit, and so if you remember, perfect squares are numbers you multiply times themselves to get these answers here in red. And if it is a perfect square, then you can take a square root of them, and the answers will be just one of the two numbers you multiplied to get the perfect square. Okay, so you always have a calculator. You can use your calculator to also come up with your answers for square roots, and not all square roots will calculate. So if you notice each one of these, it goes from 1, square root of 1 is 1, square root of 4 is 2, whereas square root 2 or square root 3 is not in this list, because those are what we call irrational numbers. So anything that is a perfect square will then give you an answer for a square root that is a rational number. Not only that, when you do square roots, technically there is a plus and a minus answer, because -1 times -1 is also +1, which is why you can have square root of 1 be a -1 answer or a +1 answer. Okay, so for every single square root, you have two answers, plus and minus 1, for instance, and then square root 4 be plus and minus 2. So we'll show you how to write that in just a second. Here's an example where you have one that's already kind of been done for you, and you can see that you can divide by 4 on both sides to get rid of this 4. After you divide the 4, then we're taking the leftover answer, which is x squared, and then 25, which is the answer if you take 100 divided by 4. And if I square root both sides, what you end up with is x squared becomes x, and 25 we say is plus and minus 5. Once again, like if you take the square root of a number, -5 times -5 is still +25. So square root can have a negative answer, or it can have a positive answer. Okay, here's one. Let's try this one out. You can see that it starts off with 5 square root equal to 180. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this answer, I'm going to divide both sides by the 5. So I get x squared is going to equal 36. And because the square root of 36 is 6, don't forget we're going to write plus and minus 6. And then put down your x. And then this one is done. Okay, so you can see I took the square root after I divided out the number in front. What do you think? Hopefully kind of easy. Let's take a look at the next one. Here's one that's a little bit more involved. You got a number that is now being added to the other side because we started with the -16. So here is 4x squared minus 16. Add the 16 first, which means now 0 plus 16 equals 16 on the right. And it's kind of like the last equation now. Get rid of the 4 by dividing the 4, and then square root both sides in order to get your final answer, which is plus and minus 2. Okay, so if you want, here's the next one. You can pause the video, try this one on your own, and see if you have any luck with it. All right, if you've tried that and you are paused and you worked it out, hopefully you have the same result, as I'm going to add 5 to both sides. So this ends up being 98. I'm sorry, no. We're subtracting 5. Try that again. So we're going to minus 5 to both sides because we already had a positive 5. So that's how we're getting 98. And then 2x squared comes down. Now we're dividing by 2. X squared is going to equal 49 if I divide 48 or 98 by 2. And then you can take the square root of 49, and that should give us this answer. X equals plus and minus 7. Good job if you got that one. Let's go ahead and go to the next one. Again, you're going to see here's an example where there's a number that's being added or subtracted first. So here I got plus 7, so we're going to minus 7 to both sides. So negative 103 minus 7 is going to be negative 110. And then I can divide the 7 that's next to the x squared now to both sides, so I can get the x squared by itself. The problem is here I get a negative 110 divided by 7. If I put that in my calculator, I get a negative 15.71, yada, 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 yada. There's some more stuff here, actually. But if I take the square root of that number, my calculator is going to say error. And so the reason it's saying error is because you have a negative number underneath the square root. And so that is not a real solution, which is why you can see they wrote no real solution here. Okay, so you can write no real solution, or you can write this as your answer for no real solution. Okay, so be aware that there are answers that if you take the square root of a negative, you cannot do that in your calculator. It'll give you an error. All right, let's try this one. If you would, go ahead and pause and see if you work this one out. All right, so if you subtracted the 4 to both sides, that is correct. Here's the problem. Now what we end up with is a negative x squared equal to a positive 144. But you also have to remember that the number that's in front is a 1. Okay, so because we have this negative 1 in front, we're going to have to divide negative 1 to both sides. So that means now I have x squared equals negative 144. And we have the same problem we had on the previous one. Let me fix that real quick. We're going to end up with an x squared equal to negative 144. And because the only way to solve for x now is to take the square root in order for this x squared to equal x. And if I put that in my calculator, 144 does give me 12, but negative 144 is no real solution. It doesn't work. You'll get an error message if you try and type in the square root of negative 144. Okay? All right. Next up, I have a fraction. So if you remember, fractions are not necessarily the best ones to work with, but if they are possible. One thing you can do is to isolate the fraction first. So let's go ahead and add 3 to both sides. That way I get 1/2 with x squared equal to 8. And then if I multiply both sides by 2, what happens is the 2 here cancels with the 2 down below, and now we have 1x squared, or just x squared, and this becomes 16. And now we have an answer we can work with, because the square root of 16 should be plus and minus 4. Again, don't forget, taking the square root, we're going to get 2 answers, plus and minus. Okay. All right, take a moment and see if you can try that one. Go ahead and feel free to pause the video first, and I'll be right back. Okay, if you got as far as I did and you added 4 to both sides to get rid of this negative 4, we're good. If you got 1/3 x squared equals 11, then that means you're multiplying both sides by 3, so these 3's will cancel, and we get basically 1x squared here, and 3 times 11 ends up being 33, which is what I have here, and then we're at the next step. So now if you take the square root, because again, 1x squared is the same thing as x squared, so you don't necessarily have to write the 1 in there. We can get rid of that 1 if we want. But we do have to take the square root. So if I take the square root of 33, it's not an error, but you will get a decimal answer. Okay, so by doing the square root of 33, I got plus and minus 5.744, yada, yada, yada. So there's more answers afterwards. So what happens is this is not a perfect square. This is what we call a irrational solution, because I didn't get a perfect square answer. I didn't get a square root of 16 and got plus and minus 4 like on the other side. what I got was square root 33. So if you remember, we can do square root 36. That's 6 plus and minus. We can also do square root 25, which is 5 plus and minus. So it sort of makes sense that square root 33 is somewhere in between. So the answer for that would be somewhere in between 5 and 6. Okay, so this is why it's called irrational. It's not one of the rational answers, which is plus minus 5 or plus minus 6. Hopefully that explanation makes sense. And then let's take a look at the next one. Actually, I'm going to go past this example because I think you kind of get the gist of what we're doing here based off the other examples. I'm going to introduce this example, which is similar to one you're going to see in your notes. So somewhere where you have some room, if you could, go ahead and add this one in there. That way you have an example to go by. So on your assignment, you're going to see a couple of these where they're going to ask you to look at the equation. It looks like a word problem. It says the time t in seconds that an object is falling in the air can be described by the vertical motion in this formula. And then it gives you h of t equals negative 2t squared plus 50, where h of t is the object's height above the ground at time t. So let me just break it down for you. You got the equation. Let's just start with what we have here. And I'm going to put that right here. H of t equals negative 2t squared plus 50. Okay, so what we're going to say is if the ball hits the ground or the object hits the ground that time t, then the height, right, if it's above the ground, okay, oh, they said water, okay, sorry. So in this case, it's above the water instead of the ground. That means that you're just going to basically put the height at 0. Okay, so trust me on this. Just make sure that we change this h of t into a 0. That's what we're looking for. Now we're going to solve the rest of the equation for t. So I just have to add 50, or excuse me, this one says adding 50 already. So let's do the inverse. We're going to subtract 50. That gets rid of that 50 over there. We'll have negative 50 over here. But then we already have a negative 2t squared. So the next step is to divide by negative 2. And because I'm dividing a negative with a negative, I'll get a positive t squared on the right. And over here, we're going to get a positive 25. And then check this out. Once I take the square root, now we know this is going to be plus and minus 5 for t. Now, here's the deal. Because t is time, t can only be positive, okay? So in this case, we want to make sure that you guys are seeing it. It's going to take 5 seconds for this object to hit the water. Okay, so positive 5 seconds. Even though we know plus and minus t, plus and minus 5 is your answer for t, we're only going to use the positive answer because this is a time value. Okay, so hopefully that helps. When you see the rest of these in the homework, just know that you're always going to take your function, if it's h for height, make that a 0, and then you're solving for t, just like we did here. Okay. All right, we're going to have a worksheet available for you. The substitute should have that for you as soon as you're done with this video. Please feel free to go back, review the video, watch the examples again. Don't forget your answers could be plus and minus. If it's a real solution, remember if you get a square root, that's a negative underneath, you'll get a non-real solution. And if you get decimal answers, those ones are irrational. So there's 3 different kinds of answers you could get, and that is something they want you to classify on your answer sheet. Okay? All right, good luck with this, and I will see you guys on Tuesday. Have a great day.